used to play basketball.
And then from there, it goes all the way to the I mean, and then when I energized in the summer, I did high schoolers to Ohio, which is in Virginia, Pennsylvania.
All right. It is 6 o'clock, Tuesday, December 3rd, 2024. We'll call the City Council special meeting to order. Could you please call the roll?
Councilmember Baker?
Here.
Councilmember Curley,
Here.
Councilmember DeMonico?
Here.
Mayor Kleinfeld?
Here.
Councilmember Shadlick?
Here.
All right, moving on to the first hearing of the public. The first hearing of the public is now open. Would anyone wish to be heard?
Hi, Jennifer Nicholas, Eastpointe resident. I was looking through the agenda packet for this special meeting, and I came across the organizational chart here. And I find it interesting, at the top here is the citizens of Eastpointe. Underneath that is Eastpointe City Council, which I assume includes the mayor. So looking at that, I kind of feel that residents of Eastpointe are at the top of the organizational chart. And while each of you are residents of Eastpointe, you are just one out of 34,000. You know, we have opinions, you have opinions. Your opinion as a resident is different than your role as a city council member. My understanding of city council's function is to represent all of the other residents. You can include your opinion in that of the residents, but each one of your opinions should not supersede any one of our opinions. You all seem to be in favor of democracy where majority rules, and you know, I know the regular meeting that we have coming up at 7 o'clock is going to be talking about the 9-mile road diet again. We've gone round and round with this, and I don't feel that you are listening to the residents. You know, initially when this came forward, there was a survey that was sent out in early 2021 that 638 residents responded to. Nowhere in there in the survey was there a mention of reducing lanes or traffic calming in general. Things that people felt were important about 9 Mile were that they wanted landscaping and beautification. 71% of the people wanted that. Outdoor gathering spaces, safer or more crosswalks. None of those things had anything to do with the road. In that survey, 97% of the people access 9 Mile by car. 27% never walk or bike on 9 Mile. Another 27% said they maybe once or twice a year walked or biked on 9 Mile. So, you know, you've not done any type of follow-up surveys on road diets. The public hearing on February 6th, a lot of people came out and spoke, and it seemed like they were ignored. So I'm, you know, with this organizational chart here, I really feel that residents should be, since we are at the top there, there's got to be a better way for you to represent us completely. Everybody, not just your friends, family, or special interests that you have, but residents, the majority of residents in general. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to be heard? All right, seeing none, the hearing of the public is closed. New business, our fiscal year 2024 audit presentation. We have Mr. Mike Rolka.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. My name is Mike Rolka with Yo and Yo CPAs. I'm a principal, and this is the first year Yo and Yo has conducted the audit of the city of Eastpointe. If you could please move to the next slide. So first, I'd like to talk about what is an audit and what's the purpose of an audit. So an audit is a detailed review on a test basis of the financial statements of the city. With that, you have to recall, we're trying to issue an opinion on the financial statements that is materially correct, meaning we look for big errors, big discrepancies, and make sure those are adjusted. And the purpose of it is to issue our opinion so that others, third parties, the public, can rely on these financial statements as accurate. With that, we've issued an unmodified opinion on the financial statements, and that's the best assurance you can get on financial statements. That's what you want to hear every single time you get an audit. It's like getting an A+ on your report card. Next, I have a few slides that just briefly highlight some of the financial statement figures, primarily focusing on the general fund, but also going into some of the enterprise funds. If you could please move forward. This is a 5-year trend of the governmental funds, the revenues, expenditures, and fund balances over the past 5 years. So this year, you'll see in blue that the revenues slightly exceeded the expenses, and fund balance had a very slight increase. Last year, it looks like the revenues were up quite a bit, but there were simply more pension grants. And the reason the expenses this year were more than last year by quite a bit there would be because there was essentially a one-time pension grant from the state of Michigan in the amount of $6 million. So $6 million of revenues, $6 million of expenditures, no effect on your fund balance there. Moving forward, there's a snapshot of the general fund's revenues, just in a pictograph. If you could please advance the slide. This is what the revenue breakdown is in the general fund for 2024. And I guess that's a key point to go back on. These numbers are for the period July 1, 2023 through June 30, 2024. So it's a bit of a history lesson here, and your numbers as of now may be significantly different. You'll see here that the state grants is significantly more probably than what you've seen in the past, and that again is because of that pension grant, bumping it up to $10.9 million. Previously, it would have been closer to the high fours, $5 million range. The charges for services is one of the other larger areas. That's the South Macomb Oakland Regional Services Authority, so your fire and rescue revenues. And then the next largest chunk there, probably to no surprise to you, is property taxes. If we could move to the next slide. A similar slide on the general fund's expenditures, public safety making up the vast majority of the costs. Judicial in there as a small amount, a couple other small areas, and then your general government. And once again, the general government this year is inflated because of that pension grant. So I want you to be aware of that. That is the reason. It's $6 million more than you would expect to see the year prior or in the next year. On the following slide is a breakdown of the general fund's fund balances. So the purple section here is committed fund balance, which represents amount that is set aside for specific purposes, but that council can decide at another time, if they so choose, to use on something else. The orange section is the next largest section. That's $3.7 million, and that represents your unassigned fund balance. So those are fund balances that you're free to use on whatever projects make the most sense to operate the city. That represents 11% of annual operating expenditures, but if we pull out that pension grant, because again, that's a one-time thing, it represents 13% of annual expenditures, which I would say is a fairly healthy fund balance. Moving forward is a 5-year trend of the enterprise funds. That would primarily be the water and sewer fund. And what you'll see here is that the revenues and expenses pretty much looks the same year over year for the past 5 years, but it looks like the expenses are a little bit lower this year. Well, there was a reason for that. The special accounting for the pension and OPEB funds requires that certain things are layered and amortized over future periods. And because of the amortization effect of this year on pension and OPEB expenses were actually reduced by about $3.5 million. So it'll probably be a reduction as well next year to pension expense. However, just know that's why the expenses look a little bit lower there. The gold bar across the top is an important thing to consider, and what that represents is your net investment in capital assets. And as you see that climbing, what that means is you're replacing your infrastructure at a greater rate than it's being depreciated, so able to keep those systems in place. Last thing I want to point out is the unrestricted net position. Slight increase year over year in the gray bar there. On the next slide, we'll take a quick look at the retirement systems and the funding status at the end of the year. So the first one is the MERS plan, and this is the big plan. There's nearly $100 million of projected liabilities, and remember, this is a major estimate calculated by the actuaries, but set aside specifically to pay those liabilities into the future is nearly $53 million, and so it's almost 54% funded. The death benefits OPEB plan is 230% funded. However, it's a very small plan in comparison to the others, with $600,000 of projected liability and nearly $1.4 million of dedicated assets. Lastly, the retiree health care has just about a $19 million liability and with almost $10 million of dedicated assets for those retiree health care benefits, and that's almost 51% funded. It's important to know these assets are held in trust and they're dedicated for these specific purposes, and they cannot be used or pulled out for any other reason. Lastly, I have a few items that you should be aware of that go into these financial statements that are estimates, as an example, and upcoming accounting standards. So as I call it, that has a bunch of valuable data for you. These are the highlights of that letter. So if you don't want to read it in its entirety, here's what you need to know. So first, within the financial statements, sometimes I say that there's estimates in them, and it may scare people or cause alarm. But in reality, you cannot prepare any set of financial statements without estimates. And so the most significant estimates in these financial statements are the useful lives of capital assets. That is, when you buy a new asset, how long will you depreciate it? Leases receivable. So when you have a contract for a lease and it has potential extension clauses, how many clauses do you expect to renew at the time you record it? What sort of an interest rate will you utilize in that contract? Right to use assets and lease liabilities, that is primarily police vehicles. Similar sorts of estimates go into that, is how many renewal periods do you anticipate using? The net pension liability and the net OPEB liability and net OPEB asset, as we previously discussed, those are developed by the actuary, includes things such as mortality rates, discount rates, investment rate of returns, and other inputs. And lastly, the incurred but not reported claims. So that would be claims that have occurred as of your year end but have not yet been reported to the city. In the upcoming years, there's a couple of three accounting standards that you should be aware of that may affect your financial statements. The first one is GASB Statement 101, and that is a new financial reporting model for compensated absences. And what that does is it kind of brings everybody together to report this number in the same way, but it also makes it much more of an estimate. You have to estimate how much sick time do you think people will use? Will they, what's their chances of retiring if you only pay it out when they retire? These sort of things. The next one is GASB Statement 102. It's certain risk disclosures is what it's called. And that requires disclosures when there are facts and circumstances that have happened and an evaluation of what the city is doing to mitigate those certain risks. So a great example of that would be if you have one large taxpayer or one of your large taxpayers goes out of business, as an example, and you know that's going to be a major impact to your property taxes. What are you going to do to mitigate that risk? Do you cut costs? Do you raise funds in some other way? Lastly, GASB Statement 103, financial reporting model improvements. This is a new financial reporting model that the financial statements will have to adhere to. Some of the major changes that go along with that are an emphasis on the management's discussion and analysis about why changes year over year have occurred, as well as more in the budgetary schedules. For example, a variance column from the original to final budget. With that, I'd like to thank you all. Oh, excuse me, one more thing, but this one's easy. I have no findings to report, no material weaknesses, no significant deficiencies identified. Everybody did a really great job, and it was a great audit. I'd like to thank you for hiring Yo and Yo as your auditors. Thank Randy and Kelly especially for doing all the hard work, because it is a tremendous amount of work to get ready for an audit. So thank you. Any questions I can answer?
Thank you. Any questions from council? All right. This is an easy one then.
Yep, thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much.
I've never had claps before.
Mayor and council reports. Let's start with Councilman Baker.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Roca, I was just going to say thank you for what you've done, and we appreciate it. We know that it's a labor of love, right? We'll say it like that. So thank you. And to our finance department, how they contributed, we appreciate that too. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Councilman Curley.
Thank you, Mayor. Turned my mic on. Thank you. Just one thing, since I've been thinking about this for almost 2 weeks now, keep the faith. Don't let things take you under that you have no control of, and things will be okay. We're going to work it out, but just have the faith and get things done that you have to do. Thank you.
Councilwoman Pashadlik.
I'd also like to echo Councilman Baker's sentiments as well. I'd like to thank Randy and Kelly, especially for all their diligent hard work, and Yo and Yo as well. I'm very pleased to see the audit. So, great. That's all I have.
All right, Councilman DeMonico.
Yep, thanks, Mike, Yo and Yo, and your whole team there, and thanks, Kelly, thanks, Randy, whole finance crew. Great audit, I'd say. Thanks.
All right, same for me. Thanks to our finance department, Mr. Rolka. I think it's been a pleasure getting reports from Yo and Yo. We also had our SEMSD SMDA from them. So I have nothing further. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
A second.
Please call the roll.
Councilmember Curley,
Yes.
Councilmember Baker,
Yes.
Councilmember DeMonico,
Yes.
Mayor Kleinfeld,
Yes.
Councilmember Shadlick.
Yes.
All right, meeting adjourned at 6:17.